The lake was what sold me on Whispering Pines. After 15 years of saving every extra penny from my accounting job, I finally had enough for a down payment on my dream home. The real estate agent did not even need to show me the inside of the house. The moment we walked around back and I saw that pristine water reflecting the afternoon sun, I knew this was it. The dock extending 20 feet out from the property line was the perfect spot for my weekend fishing trips. No more driving 3 hours to the state park. No more fighting crowds for a decent spot. Just me, my rod, and the peaceful sounds of nature right in my own backyard. For the first 2 months, life was exactly what I had imagined. I would wake up early on Saturday mornings, brew a pot of coffee, grab my fishing gear, and head out to the dock before the neighborhood stirred to life. The morning mist would hover over the water, creating a mystical scene that made me feel like I had the entire world to myself. Sometimes I would catch something worthy of dinner, other times I would catch nothing at all. But that was never really the point. It was about the tranquility, the escape from spreadsheets and corporate meetings, the chance to breathe fresh air and reset my mind. I had been vaguely aware that our community had a homeowners association when I purchased the property. The realtor mentioned it in passing, noting a reasonable monthly fee that covered common area maintenance and some community events. What she failed to mention was that the HOA was run by people who viewed their positions as divine appointments, with Karen Williams serving as their self-appointed queen. I first noticed them watching me during my third weekend at the lake. 3 board members standing on the community path that ran along one side of the lake, pointing in my direction and making notes on clipboards. I waved, trying to be neighborly. They did not wave back. Instead, they huddled closer together, their body language clearly communicating that I had committed some unknown offense. The following weekend, a woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair styled in the quintessential "Can I speak to your manager?" cut approached my dock. She introduced herself as Karen Williams, HOA president. Her smile never reached her eyes as she informed me that there were community guidelines about lake usage that I should familiarize myself with. When I asked for clarification, she merely said the information was in your welcome packet and strolled away, her designer sandals clicking against the wooden boardwalk. I searched through the mountain of paperwork from my home purchase, but found nothing specific about fishing restrictions. The HOA covenant mentioned that the association maintained community areas, including green spaces and water features, but there was nothing prohibiting fishing or claiming ownership of the lake itself. So I continued my weekend ritual, finding peace at the end of my fishing line, until the certified letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I had to sign for it, which should have been my first clue that something unpleasant waited inside. The HOA letterhead featured an unnecessarily ornate logo, and beneath it, the notice of violation stood out in bold text. Unauthorized fishing in HOA waters, fine amount, $500. I read the letter 3 times, my confusion turning to disbelief and then to anger. According to this document, the lake was under the exclusive jurisdiction of the Whispering Pines HOA, and all water activities required prior board approval and the purchase of a special permit. There was no mention of these permits in any of my closing documents or the partial HOA guidelines I had received. When I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter, I got Karen's voicemail. I left what I thought was a reasonable message, asking for clarification about lake ownership and requesting a copy of the specific bylaw that prohibited fishing without a permit. 3 days passed with no response. I tried again, this time sending an email to the HOA's general address. The reply came within minutes, a terse message stating only, "The fine stands. Payment due within 30 days to avoid additional penalties." It was clear that reasonable discussion was not going to resolve this situation. Looking out at the lake that evening, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and gold, I made a decision. If the HOA wanted to claim ownership of that beautiful body of water, they would need to prove it, and I would need to understand exactly what my property rights actually included. The battle for the lake had begun. The county record's office smelled like dust and forgotten paperwork. The clerk behind the desk looked surprised when I requested the original property deeds and development plans for Whispering Pines. "Most people just check that stuff online these days," she said, adjusting her glasses. I explained that I needed to see Everett. including historical documents that might not have been digitized. Her interest seemed piqued by my determination, and she disappeared into the back rooms, returning 20 minutes later with a cart loaded with file boxes. "These go back to when Whispering Pines was just a concept on paper," she explained, helping me set up at a large table in the corner. "The original development was approved in 1982, but there have been multiple amendments and property line adjustments since then. You might be here a while." She was right. I spent the entire day poring over faded blueprints, property surveys, and legal descriptions. By closing time, my eyes burned from strain, but I had filled an entire notebook with potentially useful information. The most interesting discovery was that the lake had not been created by the developer as I had assumed. It was a natural body of water that existed long before Whispering Pines was conceived, and according to the original plans, specific waterfront properties, including mine, included partial ownership rights to the lake itself. This conflicted directly with the HOA's claim of total jurisdiction. I needed professional help to make sense of the legal implications, so I scheduled an appointment with Martin Richardson, a real estate attorney specializing in property disputes. When we met 2 days later, I spread my findings across his desk. Martin examined each document carefully, making notes and occasionally nodding to himself. After nearly an hour of review, he looked up at me with raised eyebrows. "This is fascinating," he said, tapping a finger on the original property survey. "According to these documents, your property deed includes what we call riparian rights, essentially ownership rights to the portion of the lake that borders your land, extending to what would be considered the center point of the water body." "So the HOA cannot fine me for fishing on my own property?" I asked. "It is more complicated than that," Martin explained, pulling out a legal pad. "Riparian rights are an old and sometimes contested area of property law. What is clear is that the HOA does not have exclusive ownership of the lake as they claim. What is less clear is exactly how those rights are divided among waterfront property owners and what authority the HOA actually has." He sketched a rough diagram of the lake, marking my property and indicating how the ownership rights might extend into the water. "Based on these documents, I believe you and the other waterfront property owners collectively own the lake, with each having rights to the portion adjacent to your property line. The HOA may have been granted certain management rights by the developer, but that does not constitute ownership." This was the first piece of good news I had received since the fine arrived, but Martin was careful not to overstate my position. "Before you celebrate too much, we need to check one more crucial angle. HOAs sometimes obtain control through other legal mechanisms, like easements or management agreements. Let me do some additional research on riparian rights in this county specifically." Over the next week, Martin dug deeper into county records and case law. When we met again, his expression told me he had found something significant. "I found 3 previous cases in this county involving lake rights and HOAs," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "In all 3 instances, the courts upheld the riparian rights of individual property owners against HOA claims of total control. There was one case particularly similar to yours from 2010, where an HOA attempted to restrict fishing and boating. The judge ruled decisively in favor of the homeowner." "So I can fight this fine?" I asked. "You can do more than that," Martin replied, a slight smile forming. "The inconsistencies I have found between what your HOA claims and what the legal documents show suggest they have been overstepping their authority for years. Your fine is just a symptom of a much larger problem." As I drove home, my mind raced with this new information. I was not just some homeowner who had violated an obscure rule. I was a property owner with legitimate legal rights that were being trampled by an overzealous HOA board. The question now was how to proceed. Should I simply contest the fine, or was there a way to address the larger issue of the HOA exceeding its authority? When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Karen watching from her front yard across the street. She made a show of checking her watch and then glancing pointedly at my fishing rod visible through my car window. Her message was clear. She was monitoring my every move. Little did she know, I now had ammunition in this fight that she never anticipated. Armed with my newfound knowledge and Martin's legal advice, I drafted a formal letter contesting the fishing fine. I included copies of the relevant property documents, highlighted sections of the riparian right, GHTS precedents, and a polite but firm request that the fine be rescinded immediately. The letter ended with a deadline, 7 business days to withdraw the fine, or I would be forced to pursue additional legal remedies. I hand-delivered the letter to Karen's mailbox, making sure to use certified mail with a return receipt requested. This was no longer about fishing. This was about standing up to bullies who counted on homeowner ignorance and apathy to maintain their power. 5 days later, I received a response. The HOA board had reviewed my concerns, but determined that the fine would stand. The letter included a single paragraph citing the HOA covenant's vague language about community water features, and ended with a reminder that the fine would increase by 10% every 30 days it remained unpaid. That evening, as I stood on my back deck staring at the lake, I noticed my neighbor Tom doing the same. We had exchanged pleasantries a few times, but never had a real conversation. On impulse, I walked over to the property line and called out a greeting. "Beautiful evening," I said, gesturing toward the sunset reflecting on the water. Tom nodded, then glanced around cautiously before speaking. "Heard you got hit with one of Karen's fishing fines," he said quietly. "Word travels fast around here," I replied. "Karen makes sure of that, loves to make examples of people." He stepped closer to the property line. "Listen, I got the same fine last summer, paid it because I did not want the hassle, but there are at least 5 other homeowners who have been targeted with various lake-related violations. The Millers got fined for having a kayak, the Johnsons for letting their kids swim without getting proper authorization." This was exactly the information I needed. Would any of them be willing to talk about their experiences? I asked. Tom hesitated, then nodded. "I can ask around. A lot of people are fed up with the board, but everyone is afraid of becoming their next target. Karen has a reputation for holding grudges." Over the next few days, I met discreetly with several neighbors. Each had a story about HOA overreach, particularly regarding the lake. Some had paid fines without question. Others had attempted to challenge the board, but eventually gave up when the process became too complicated or time-consuming. All expressed frustration with the current leadership, but felt powerless to create change. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. I decided it was time to bring my concerns into the open forum. When I arrived at the community center, I was surprised to see several of the neighbors I had spoken with already seated. Tom gave me a subtle nod as I took a seat near the back of the room. Karen called the meeting to order exactly on time, running through standard business with military precision. When she reached the open forum portion of the agenda, I raised my hand. The slight tightening of her lips told me she had been expecting this. "The chair recognizes Mr. Davis," she said, her voice professionally neutral despite the coldness in her eyes. I stood and addressed the room, keeping my voice calm and respectful. "I would like to discuss the issue of lake ownership and usage rights. I have done extensive research into the property deeds and county records, and I believe there are significant discrepancies between what those legal documents show and how the board has been managing lake access." Before I could continue, Karen interrupted. "Lake management policies are not up for discussion. They were established in the founding documents of this association." "Actually," I countered, "I have copies of those founding documents right here, and they tell a different story." I held up the folder Martin had helped me prepare. According to the original property deeds and county records, waterfront property owners have riparian rights to the portions of the lake that border their properties. Karen's face flushed slightly. "Mr. Davis, this is not the appropriate venue for legal interpretations. If you have concerns about HOA policies, there is a formal process for submitting them in writing to the board." "I have already done that," I replied. "My concern was dismissed without proper consideration of the evidence." From the corner of my eye, I could see other homeowners leaning forward, interested in the conversation. One woman near the front raised her hand. "I would like to hear more about these riparian rights," she said. "We were fined last year for putting a floating dock off our property." Karen rapped her gavel sharply. "We need to move on with the agenda. Mr. Davis, you may submit any additional documentation to the board for review. Next item of business." The rest of the meeting proceeded with Karen firmly shutting down any attempt to return to the lake discussion. As people filed out afterward, several neighbors approached me quietly, expressing support and sharing their own stories of lake-related fines and restrictions. What became abundantly clear from these conversations was that lake access was being used as both a power tool and a revenue stream for the HOA. The board collected thousands of dollars annually in lake-related fines and permit fees, none of which seemed to go toward actual lake maintenance or improvement. As I walked home under the stars that night, the truth of the situation crystallized in my mind. This was never about rules or community standards. It was about a small group of people who enjoyed wielding power over their neighbors and profiting from it. The fishing fine was just a symptom of a deeper problem that affected our entire community. I needed a solution that would not just solve my immediate problem, but would permanently prevent the HOA from abusing homeowners in this way. Fighting each individual fine would be an endless battle. I needed to change the rules of engagement entirely. And to do that, I would need to find a creative legal strategy that the board would never see coming. The next morning, I called Martin with a new question. "If I own part of the lake, what exactly can I do with that ownership?" His answer surprised me. "That is an interesting angle," he said. "Riparian rights typically include usage rights like fishing, swimming, and boating, but they can also include certain disposition rights depending on state and local regulations. Let me look into this further." 2 days later, Martin called me back with excitement in his voice. "I think I found something that could be a game changer. Are you familiar with conservation easements and environmental protection statutes?" I was not, but over the next hour, Martin explained a legal concept that seemed almost too perfect to be true. Under our state laws, owners of natural resources like lakes, streams, and wetlands could donate those resources to county or state conservation programs. These donations created permanent protections for the natural feature, while potentially providing tax benefits to the donor. The key, Martin explained, is that once donated for conservation purposes, the resource becomes subject to public use regulations rather than private or HOA restrictions. And even more interesting is that our county has a particularly strong environmental protection department that actively seeks such donations. This was intriguing, but I still had questions. Would I be giving up my property rights completely? "Not necessarily," Martin replied. "You would be donating the water rights while maintaining your land ownership. Think of it as creating a permanent division between the land, which would remain your private property, and the water, which would become a protected public resource." And what would this mean for the HOA's control over the lake? Martin's smile was audible through the phone. "That is where it gets interesting. The HOA would lose all authority over lake usage. Those decisions would fall to the county environmental department. And based on my knowledge of how the county operates, they generally allow fishing, swimming, and non-motorized boating on all protected waters." The potential of this solution was beginning to dawn on me. So not only would I be protected from future fines, but all homeowners would gain access to the lake without HOA interference. "Exactly, but there is one more angle that makes this particularly satisfying." Martin paused. "Properties that border protected environmental resources are subject to strict maintenance standards and permit requirements. The county requires buffer zones to be properly maintained, runoff to be controlled, and various environmental compliance measures to be followed, and these requirements come with inspections and fees." "Who would be responsible for those fees?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "The entity responsible for the common areas bordering the protected resource," Martin replied, "which in this case would be the HOA," I finished, a smile spreading across my face. "Precisely, they would go from collecting fees to paying them. and based on similar cases I have worked on, those fees can run into thousands of dollars annually. There was just one catch: I could not donate the entire lake on my own. As Martin explained, I only had rights to the portion adjoining my property. For this plan to work, I would need to coordinate with other lakefront property owners. Given the conversations I had after the HOA meeting, I suspected many would be on board, but we would need to proceed carefully. Karen and the board would certainly oppose any such effort if they caught wind of it. The next step was to consult with an environmental law specialist who could navigate the complex donation process. Martin referred me to Alexandra Patel, an attorney who had successfully handled multiple conservation easements in our county. Alexandra's office was filled with photographs of natural landscapes and awards from environmental organizations. Unlike Martin's downtown corporate setting, her space felt more like a nature center than a law firm. She listened intently as I explained the situation with the HOA and outlined what Martin and I had discussed. "This is exactly the kind of case I love," she said when I finished. "Using environmental law to both protect natural resources and address a community injustice." She pulled a massive legal reference book from her shelf and flipped to a section highlighted with numerous sticky notes. Conservation easements are powerful tools, but the process can be complex. The good news is that your lake appears to qualify under several protected categories based on your description. Alexandra projected a map of our neighborhood onto a screen on her wall. "Your community sits in what we call a priority watershed area. The county has been trying to increase protection of water resources in this zone for years. They would likely be very receptive to a donation proposal." As she walked me through the process, several key benefits became clear. Not only would the donation prevent HOA overreach, but it would also provide actual environmental protections for the lake, potentially improving water quality and wildlife habitat. Additionally, contributors to the donation could receive significant tax deductions based on the appraised value of the water rights. "There is one more benefit that might interest your neighbors," Alexandra added. "Once designated as a protected resource, the county takes over primary maintenance responsibilities. They monitor water quality, manage vegetation, and address issues like erosion and invasive species, services your HOA might be charging for but not adequately providing." By the end of our meeting, I had a comprehensive understanding of what needed to happen. We would need signatures from owners representing at least 60% of the lake's shoreline. We would need environmental surveys and property appraisals. And most importantly, we would need to keep the entire process confidential until the legal documentation was complete. As I left Alexandra's office, I felt a surge of hope for the first time since receiving that fishing fine. This was not just about fighting back against an unjust penalty. It was about permanently protecting a natural resource from exploitation and ensuring all community members could enjoy it. Looking at the stack of materials Alexandra had given me, I realized I had found more than a legal loophole. I had discovered a pathway to transform an act of petty tyranny into lasting community benefit. Now, I just needed to set the plan in motion without alerting Karen and her allies on the board. The key to success would be secrecy and careful coordination. If Karen or anyone on the board discovered our plan before the legal documents were finalized, they would certainly try to block it. With this in mind, I created a careful strategy for approaching other lakefront homeowners. I started with Tom, who had already proven himself an ally. Over coffee at a cafe well outside our neighborhood, I outlined the conservation easement plan. His eyes widened as I explained the potential benefits: guaranteed lake access, environmental protection, and the delicious irony of the HOA having to pay compliance fees instead of collecting them. "Count me in," he said without hesitation, "and I can introduce you to at least 3 other families who will want to be part of this." True to his word, Tom arranged discreet introductions over the next 2 weeks. We were careful never to meet as a large group that might draw attention. Instead, I had a series of one-on-one conversations with lakefront owners, always away from Whispering Pines and always with explicit agreements of confidentiality. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Many homeowners shared stories of HOA harassment similar to mine. The Johnsons had been fined for allowing their children to use a paddle board without a water activity permit. The Wilsons had received violations for installing a bird feeder that was visible from the lake. The Martinez family had been threatened with legal action for planting native water grasses along their shoreline without board approval. By the end of the month, I had commitments from owners representing nearly 70% of the lake's shoreline, well above the 60% threshold Alexandra had indicated we needed. With this coalition established, it was time to begin the formal process. Alexandra arranged for an environmental assessment of the lake, disguised as a routine water quality study. The ecologist who conducted the survey confirmed what we already knew. The lake was a valuable natural resource worthy of protection. Its water quality was good but could be improved with proper management, and it provided habitat for several species of interest to county conservation efforts. With the assessment complete, we moved on to property appraisals. This was trickier to keep quiet, as appraisers needed to visit each property. We scheduled these visits when board members were known to be away or occupied with other activities. When questioned by curious neighbors, homeowners in our coalition simply mentioned refinancing or insurance requirements as the reason for the appraisals. Meanwhile, I continued to receive notices about my unpaid fishing fine, now with added penalties. The total had grown to $650, and the most recent letter included a threat of a lien against my property if payment was not received within 30 days. I simply filed these notices away, knowing they would soon be irrelevant. Alexandra worked tirelessly behind the scenes, preparing the complex legal documentation required for the donation. Property descriptions needed to be precise, conservation objectives clearly stated, and future use guidelines carefully crafted to ensure maximum protection for both the lake and homeowner rights. The most delicate phase came when we needed to approach county officials. Alexandra leveraged her professional relationships to arrange a confidential meeting with the head of the County Environmental Protection Department, Gregory Chen. His office was located in the County Administration Building, a 40-minute drive from our neighborhood, far enough away that we were unlikely to encounter anyone from Whispering Pines. Mr. Chen greeted us warmly, clearly excited about the possibility of adding our lake to the county's conservation program. He spread a map across his conference table, marking the areas that would be included in the donation. This is exactly the kind of community-led conservation initiative we want to encourage, he said, pointing to various features of the lake. The water quality data from the assessment is promising, and the location fits perfectly with our watershed protection strategy. When I asked about the process for finalizing the donation, Mr. Chen outlined the steps. Once we receive the completed documentation from your attorney, it will go before the County Conservation Commission for approval. That meeting is scheduled for the end of the month. Assuming they approve, and I see no reason why they would not, the donation becomes official once recorded with the county clerk. And what happens after that? I asked. Our department assumes management responsibility immediately, he explained. We will conduct a comprehensive baseline assessment, install appropriate signage, and implement any necessary protection measures. We also handle all public access guidelines and enforcement. What about existing private structures like docks? One of the homeowners inquired. Existing structures are typically grandfathered in as long as they meet basic safety and environmental standards, Mr. Chen assured us. Our goal is conservation, not disruption of reasonable usage. As we wrapped up the meeting, Mr. Chen handed each of us business cards with his direct contact information. Please call me if you have any questions or concerns during this process, and thank you for your commitment to protecting this natural resource. Back in Alexandra's office, we reviewed the final documentation. Everything was in order: property descriptions, riparian rights assignments, conservation objectives, public access provisions, and most importantly, the clear transfer of management authority from the HOA to the county. One by one, the participating homeowners signed the necessary forms. Each signature brought us closer to freeing the lake from HOA control. When the last document was signed and notarized, Alexandra gathered them into a folder embossed with her firm's logo. "I will file these with the county tomorrow," she said. "Once they are processed and approved by the Conservation Commission, the donation becomes official and irreversible." As I signed my own name to the final document, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The HOA had sought to punish me for enjoying a simple pleasure on my own property. In response, I had found a way to ensure that not only I but all my neighbors would have permanent, protected access to the lake. Throughout this process, I had continued my weekend fishing ritual, deliberately visible from shore, practically daring Karen to issue another fine. She had obliged, sending a second violation notice just last week. Little did she know that in a matter of days, her authority over the lake would evaporate completely. As I left Alexandra's office that afternoon, the sky opened up in a sudden summer shower. I stood for a moment in the rain, letting it wash over me. It seemed fitting somehow, water falling freely, belonging to no one and everyone at the same time. Soon our lake would enjoy that same freedom. The County Conservation Commission meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Alexandra advised our group to attend, but to remain inconspicuous and let her handle the presentation. "The less connection drawn between all of you, the better," she explained. "We do not want to give the impression of a neighborhood faction or dispute." We followed her advice, arriving separately and sitting in different areas of the meeting room. I spotted Karen and two other board members near the front, there for an unrelated agenda item about community garden regulations. They showed no recognition of the significance of item number 7 on the evening's agenda, consideration of Whispering Pines Lake Conservation donation. When the time came, Alexandra presented our proposal with professional clarity. She explained the environmental value of the lake, showed photographs of the wildlife it supported, and outlined the conservation benefits that would result from county management. The commission members asked thoughtful questions about water quality, access provisions, and maintenance plans. After 20 minutes of discussion, they voted unanimously to accept the donation. As the gavel fell to confirm the decision, I caught Karen's expression changing from boredom to confusion to alarm as she finally registered what had just occurred. She approached the commission chair immediately after the vote, her voice too low to hear from my position, but her agitated gestures made her distress clear. The chair simply handed her a copy of the approved documentation and moved on to the next agenda item. 3 days later, county vehicles appeared at the lake's main access point. Workers in environmental department uniforms began installing signs around the perimeter. Protected watershed area, catch and release fishing permitted, public access point, and my personal favorite, environmental protection zone, permit required for modifications. News spread quickly through Whispering Pines. Neighbors stood on decks and lawns, watching as county workers mapped the shoreline and took water samples. By mid-afternoon, my phone was buzzing with text messages from coalition members reporting that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called for that evening. The community center was packed when I arrived. Every seat was filled and people stood along the walls. The tension in the room was palpable. Karen and the board members sat at their usual table at the front, but their typical confident posture was notably absent. Instead, they huddled together, whispering urgently and shuffling through papers. Karen called the meeting to order with none of her usual precision. Her voice wavered slightly as she addressed the crowd. "We have called this emergency session to address a situation that has developed regarding the lake. It has come to our attention that certain homeowners have taken unauthorized action that directly impacts HOA-managed property." I raised my hand immediately. Karen hesitated before acknowledging me, clearly anticipating what was coming. "Point of order," I said calmly. "The lake is no longer HOA-managed property. As of the County Conservation Commission meeting 3 days ago, it is officially designated as a protected environmental resource under county jurisdiction." A murmur ran through the room. Karen's face flushed. "These actions were taken without proper consultation with the board. We are exploring legal options to challenge this unauthorized transfer." "There was nothing unauthorized about it," I replied, standing now. The donation was made by the legal owners of the lake, the homeowners with riparian rights to the water adjacent to their properties. Those rights are clearly established in the original property deeds and have been upheld repeatedly in county courts. Karen's composure slipped further. You have deliberately undermined the authority of this association and violated the community covenant. I removed a folder from my bag and held it up. I have here the complete legal documentation approved by the County Conservation Commission and recorded with the county clerk. The donation is legal, proper, and importantly, irrevocable. At this point, Mr. Chen from the County Environmental Department stepped forward from the back of the room. I had invited him to attend, anticipating this confrontation. "Good evening," he said, addressing the entire room. "I am Gregory Chen, Director of Environmental Protection for the county. I am here to answer any questions about the recent conservation donation and what it means for your community." For the next 30 minutes, Mr. Chen explained the new status of the lake with calm authority. He outlined the environmental benefits, the public access provisions, and the maintenance responsibilities the county would assume. Homeowners asked questions about fishing regulations, dock usage, and water quality monitoring. Mr. Chen answered each query thoroughly, painting a picture of a well-managed natural resource that would benefit the entire community. Then came the question I had been waiting for, one of the board members asked about modifications to the shoreline and landscaping requirements. "That is an excellent question," Mr. Chen replied. "As a protected watershed area, the lake shoreline is subject to specific environmental regulations. Any entity responsible for common areas bordering the water must obtain permits for maintenance activities and comply with our buffer zone requirements." "And what are the costs associated with these permits?" the board member asked nervously. Mr. Chen consulted his notes. For an area of this size, the annual environmental compliance fee would be approximately $7,500. There are also inspection fees of $1,200 per quarter. Any modifications would require additional permits ranging from $500 to $3,000 depending on the scope of work. A collective gasp went through the room. Karen looked as though she might faint. The HOA's annual budget was publicly available, and everyone knew these unexpected costs would devastate their financial reserves. "These fees are assessed to the entity responsible for common area maintenance," Mr. Chen continued. "In this case, that would be the Homeowners Association." The irony was exquisite. The organization that had attempted to fine me for fishing was now facing thousands of dollars in mandatory fees and compliance costs, and there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. As the meeting dissolved into heated discussions about budget implications and assessment increases, I caught Tom's eye across the room. He gave me a subtle nod and a smile. Phase 1 of our lake liberation was complete. 6 months have passed since the lake transition, and the transformation has been remarkable. The county environmental team implemented a comprehensive management plan that has already improved water quality and shoreline stability. Native plants now grow in protected zones along the edge, providing habitat for birds and beneficial insects. Regular water testing ensures the lake remains healthy for both wildlife and human enjoyment. The HOA was forced to increase monthly dues by 15% to cover the new environmental compliance costs, a change that provoked considerable backlash from homeowners. Even more satisfying was the line item in the revised budget labeled County Environmental Fees, $12,300 annually. In a development that surprised no one, Karen resigned from the HOA board 3 months after the lake transition. The official reason given was personal commitments, but everyone knew the truth. Her power base had eroded along with the HOA's control of the lake. The new board, elected with a mandate for transparency and reasonable governance, has taken a much more collaborative approach to community management. Perhaps the most meaningful change has been the formation of a volunteer lake conservation committee, independent from the HOA. This group works directly with the county to organize cleanup events, monitor wildlife, and educate residents about the ecosystem in our backyards. Monthly lake days, bring families together for supervised activities that foster appreciation for this natural resource. When I go fishing now, I often see neighbors I never spoke to before. Children splash in designated swimming areas while parents chat on the shore. Kayakers glide peacefully across the water. All of this happens without permission slips, special permits, or threat of fines. The lake has become what it should have been all along, a source of community connection rather than conflict. Last weekend, as I sat on my dock with my fishing line in the water, I noticed a county maintenance team conducting their quarterly inspection. They waved as they passed in their boat, checking water quality and examining the shoreline plantings. Later that day, I saw them present an invoice to the new HOA treasurer, another $3,000 in environmental compliance fees. I cast my line again, feeling the gentle tug as it hit the water. The morning sun sparkled on the surface, and somewhere beneath, fish swam freely in protected waters. Sometimes the best revenge is not just winning the battle, but transforming the battlefield entirely. I had turned an unjust fine into a permanent victory not just for myself, but for an entire ecosystem and community. And that feeling was worth far more than $500.